I mentioned the Star Show. We have Gordon Chang joining us, who's joined us in the past. He's always just a complete delight to have on the show. I'm so grateful whenever he's available. And so wanted to just tell you briefly about him. I know many of you probably know his name and have heard him speak various places. He is an expert on China extraordinaire. He's the author of The Coming Collapse of China and Nuclear Showdown. North Korea Takes on the World, both from Random House. He's spoken at every significant conservative organization, Council on Foreign Relations, Heritage Foundation, Brookings, Cato, RAND, American Enterprise Institute, given testimony and briefings at National Intelligence Council, the CIA, the State Department, the Pentagon. He's truly a national treasure in terms of understanding America's relations with China. And as we now enter the Biden administration and deal with the threats that China faces, China presents to America, I thought it was time to check in with Gordon Chang and find out how things are going with our relations with China and how the Biden administration is doing in interacting with China. So with that, I'd like to welcome Gordon Chang. Hi.
Hi, Debbie, and thank you very much for that very, very kind introduction.
You are so welcome. Every time you speak, people are just so happy that you're there, and I've heard you speak in many public venues. I'm just very grateful for you. So I want to jump in and ask you, just to start with, so you've been on my show numerous times when we had President Trump. We now have President Biden. Is there a difference in your view in the way in which the Trump administration interacted with China as compared with how the Biden administration is interacting with China?
It's like night and day. President Trump imposed costs on China for unacceptable behavior. He broke 5 decades of engagement policy, which was a failure. You know, people thought that as we engaged China, as we worked with them, as cooperated with them, which helped China, that China would become benign as it became stronger. Well, the opposite was true. And indeed, you know, this whole notion of engagement persisted long after everyone knew that it was a failure. Well, President Trump said, look, I'm not having it. And what he did was said, look, China's going to have to play by the rules, and we mean it. Now, with Biden, Biden has this outdated notion going back to those 5 decades of engagement. And we heard that at his CNN town hall a week ago, where he's talking to Anderson Cooper about human rights problems and all the rest of it. And for him, obviously, China was just another country that we could compete with. Well, no, it's not, because China has designated the United States to be its enemy, and we have got to understand the maliciousness of its designs.
That's a great answer, and not an unexpected answer. It is an amazing night and day difference in terms of President. And I will go back to President Trump for a moment. President Trump's campaign, his presidency was all about prioritizing the needs of the American economy, the American people, the country of America, the sovereignty of America. And that's just not where the Biden administration is. It's not what the premise upon which they make policy. But I want to jump and ask you, there was an amazing thing, and I think I emailed you about this, but this China's foreign affairs minister, whose name is Wang Yi, he actually had a statement put out basically talking about his 4 requirements from Xi Jinping's regime. It was a video conference where he presented, by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, presented 4 demands to America. And they were, this was in late February, so last month. Basically, they were, I'll run through them with you. One was stop the wrong behavior in speeches that condone Taiwan's independence or the separatist movement. Basically, stop meddling with Hong Kong, etc. That was demand number 1. Demand number 2, resume U.S.-China dialogue. Number 3, ending the additional tariffs on Chinese products and sanctions while lifting sanctions. And number 4, remove all restrictions on Chinese educational, cultural, news, and foreign affairs entities. So these are huge changes, demands being made by China. I want to start with the first one. So this gentleman, Wang Yi, said essentially to America, he wanted to telling America, stop the wrong behavior in speeches that condone or even support Taiwan independence, stop meddling in Hong Kong, etc. What do you think the right answer is for America to a demand like that from China?
Well, the United States should tell China in no uncertain terms, both privately and publicly, that the United States will defend Taiwan from an attack from China. Taiwan's really important to the United States because for more than a century, Debbie, we have drawn our Western defense perimeter off the coast of East Asia, and Taiwan is at the center of that line. It's where the East China Sea and South China Sea meet. That line's important to us because we want to prevent the Chinese Navy and Air Force from surging into the Western Pacific. So we must tell them that in no uncertain terms. But there's something even more important, and that is China is attacking our democracy every day and is attacking the whole notion of democracy. And we cannot allow the Chinese to absorb any democracy, including one as important as Taiwan. So for those two reasons, it's in our interest to defend Taiwan.
Well, my next question was going to be kind of why doesn't America, in China, to take China's argument, mind their own business, that's the other side of the world, let them have Taiwan, let them control Hong Kong, what do we really care? But we actually have, America has vested interest in our own security in defending Taiwan and Hong Kong to protect our own interests in that part of the world. Correct?
Yes, and there's something else that is a broader concept, and that is that if we've had any consistent foreign policy as a republic going back to our founding, it's been the defense of the global commons. And we cannot allow China to close off portions of South China Sea, East China Sea, Yellow Sea. And the reason is that if that happens, then the Russians will close off the Black Sea and other countries will do the same thing, and we'll have a balkanized world. That's not the way that we Americans and others conceive of this. We conceive of an open architecture for the international system. So that's another critical reason, because we're a trading nation.
Yeah, thank goodness, right? Okay, so I love that you said that. Okay, so the second thing he demanded, he said, this guy, don't want to say his name correctly, Wang Yi said, was that his demand of America is we resume a U.S.-China dialogue. And essentially, I think he's kind of saying whatever it was under President Trump wasn't exactly a dialogue. He wants to get back to what he's calling the normal dialogue. What do you think he's headed with that? Why is he saying that? Why is he making that demand?
Well, because when the Chinese talk, we defer action. So the more that they drag things out, the less gets done. So we should stop talking to China. And we've made it very clear. We've talked to them for 5 decades, and their behavior has only deteriorated, especially over the last 10 years. So we've told them what we want and what we demand, what we need. And I don't think we need to talk to them anymore. If they don't adhere to normal standards of behavior, we've got to impose even greater costs on them.
That's a great segue to the next demand, he said. The third demand of the Chinese foreign minister to the new Biden administration. Third is to end additional tariffs on Chinese products, lift the sanction on Chinese enterprises and institutes, and support China's technology development. Basically, they're saying that they have, or the history is that China is engaged in a comprehensive campaign to acquire advanced technologies, basically spied on our products through trade. So, I mean, is there any basis in the world that we should go along with this demand?
Absolutely not. The tariffs that President Trump imposed beginning in 2018 under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, those were a remedy for the theft of intellectual property. China steals anywhere, and you can find estimates between $150 billion to $600 billion a year of U.S. IP. And we've got to stop that because that's a grievous loss. And those tariffs were meant to do that. Now, I think those tariffs were not high enough. I don't like the January 15th, 2020 Phase 1 trade deal. But clearly, China has not stopped stealing our stuff. So, we have no choice but to protect our intellectual property, protect our innovation, because if we don't have an economy of the future. If we don't have an economy of the future, Debbie, we don't have the United States of America.
Love that. And actually, the last one, which I thought about in planning this interview, because I have so many points I want to hit with you. I thought about only doing this one, but the fourth one was to remove all restrictions on Chinese educational, cultural, news, and foreign affairs entities. And I think you and I have talked about in the past about how the Confucius Institutes were set up at American campuses, and it was posited as, isn't that really wonderful? It's cultural understanding, aren't we great? And the fact was it was propagandizing. But talk a little bit about what they're talking about, why they are so interested in removing all restrictions on Chinese educational, cultural, etc. entities in America.
China uses every point of contact with our society to try to undermine America and indeed to overthrow the U.S. government, as they did last year. And so they've got Confucius Institutes on campus, which are relatively small in size if you look at them, but they have extraordinary influence because college administrators really bow down to the Chinese. And in many cases, that's what's happening. But it's not only the Confucius Institutes. It's also about 500 or so Confucius classrooms in secondary schools. You've got, you mentioned journalists. Most of those journalists are basically spies. I can remember about 10 years ago, I was at an event in Washington, D.C., and a guy from China Legal Daily, who's their bureau chief in the United States, came up to me and started chatting. And I was thinking, why would China Legal Daily need to have a guy in Washington? I mean, clearly what was occurring was spying and espionage. And I'm glad that Secretary of State Pompeo, actually started to declare them to be foreign missions and to restrict them, because we absolutely need to do that. I think we should toss them all out.
Love that. And I will say, you mentioned earlier, one of your answers, you mentioned that this one thing you were describing was kind of part of the broader effort of the Chinese government and its kind of gradual takeover of America. I don't know if that was your exact words, but can you describe what you were talking about?
Well, last year, China was using its troll farms, its social media platforms to incite violence on American streets. So, for instance, Radio Free Asia reports, you're in Texas. So Radio Free Asia reports that an intelligence unit of the People's Liberation Army based themselves in the now closed Houston consulate. And from there, they used big data and artificial intelligence to identify Americans likely to participate in Antifa and Black Lives Matter protests. And then the PLA, the Chinese military, sent them videos via TikTok on how to riot. That's more than just an act of subversion. That's an act of war. And indeed, with regard to the January 6th Capitol Hill insurrection or riot or whatever you want to call it, China was encouraging Americans to participate in violent acts. So again, we're seeing an attempt to overthrow the American government. And I don't know how you cooperate with a government that seeks your destruction. So I don't get this whole notion of the Biden administration that we can cooperate with China on certain matters. No, you cannot cooperate with a regime that seeks to overthrow your own government.
Amen to that. And I know over the last couple of years in doing this show, I've had you and other experts on trying to paint a picture of why people in America should be more concerned about China, because for many years, the idea was posited that if we Americans kept up our trade, kept having, we had more and more manufacturing occurring over there, we were kind of helping China pull itself out of the darkness of communism, that we would spread the ideas of freedom and we'd eventually lift up the Chinese people and maybe even the government. And so that was kind of a long held and kind of a savvy, allegedly savvy way to look at China. But you and others have been pointing out, and now it seems very obvious, we were just being played by China all along. Can you address that a little bit?
Yeah. If you look at the whole sweep of history, if you're talking in hundreds of years or centuries or millennia, yeah, that theory probably holds water. But the problem was we don't live in millennia long time frames. We live in the here and now. And in the here and now, what's happened is that as the Chinese regime has gotten stronger, it's become more ambitious. And their ambitions are to rule the world. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has been dropping hints for more than a decade that the world should move away from the Westphalian international order that's been in place since 1648 and adopt China's notions of Tianxia, or all under heaven, which means that Chinese emperors had the right, and matter of fact, were compelled by heaven to rule everything. And so essentially, this is what China is trying to do. It's trying to not just cooperate or compete with us, it's trying to rule the entire world. And Debbie, just to put another point on this, China's lunar exploration officials have been talking about the moon as sovereign Chinese territory. If they get first, they intend to...
The moon?
Yes, they're talking about, well, and I should point out that they're also talking about Mars, moon and Mars, as should be sovereign Chinese territory. That if they get there first, what they are going to do is try to exclude others. So this is not just some sort of innocent civilian space exploration program. This is really a danger. That's the way they look at it. Yes, this is ludicrous. This is completely silly. But that's the way they think. And we've got to deal with them the way they think. One other point, Debbie. People think that China ruling the world and maybe the near solar system is impossible. But we know that China is developing pathogens that will leave the Chinese alone and will sicken everybody else. Now, I don't think that they've succeeded in doing that. But if they were to succeed, that is not impossible that they could end up with everybody else completely. Their civilization, this is a civilization killer. They could end up in a point where they could rule the world. Now, I don't think it's likely, but this is their ambitions, and we got to take that into account. We got to deal with the Chinese the way they are, not the way that we want them to be, not the way we think they should be. We got to deal with the way they are today.
Gordon, first of all, I'm sorry I interrupted you. When you said moon, I actually wondered if I misheard you. That's amazing that they even think that way. And I love your point. We can't deal with them as though, in a way, you think, oh, they're probably just like America. They happen to have a different economic system, but they're really good people. This determination to become the one world ruler, we've been talking about it for a couple of years on this show with you and others. But I think that it just sounds so foreign and crazy to most Americans. They think, well, they can't be serious, but they really are. And that kind of segues to my next thing. So there was an announcement that in China, that BBC World News was going to be banned from broadcasting in their country. And you had comments about that, thought that was a dangerous thing. Can you talk about that?
Yes, well, the BBC at the beginning of last month did this important study about institutionalized rape in what the Chinese call Xinjiang, the northwestern part of the country where the Uyghurs and the Kazakhs are. And of course, that irritated Beijing to no end. But at the same time, about a week or so afterwards, the British broadcasting authorities actually disconnected, took away the license for CGTN, which is state media propaganda outlet. And they did that not because of what CGTN was really doing, but because they failed to meet technical requirements of responding to inquiries and stuff like that. And also CGTN did broadcast one of these confession videos, which violated British standards. So they pulled the plug on China. And so China decided to pull the plug on the BBC, which is what they did about a week after that. And so right now the BBC no longer has access in China. Now, that's not such a big deal because BBC was restricted to a few foreign compounds and some hotels. But nonetheless, this shows China's closing itself off from the rest of the world. China's done this numerous times during the imperial era. They did it during the early years of the People's Republic, and it's always led to disaster for the Chinese people.
Gordon, that actually ties into another topic related to, because it's interesting, you're talking about China trying to push the rest of the world out, not have them within their own borders. But at the same time, China is so aggressive here in America, as you were talking about. I also saw a report that China is buying up private schools in the United Kingdom. And I don't know if I mentioned this to you ahead of time, but are you aware of that story? And are you alarmed by that?
Yeah, we always have to be alarmed when the Chinese regime, one way or another, is able to control educational institutions in the free world. I mean, it's bad enough what we see on college campuses today, but to have, Communist Party orthodoxy being taught in schools in free societies is just abhorrent. We can't do that in China, so why should they be able to do that in our societies? There's basic lack of reciprocity. And also that issue of reciprocity goes with regard to the Confucius Institutes and the Confucius classrooms. We can't have a Reagan Institute in China. And it goes to TikTok and WeChat and all the other apps. American apps are not allowed in China. So why do we allow Chinese apps in our country, especially when they're being used for surveillance and other purposes and the rest of it? But even if they were model citizens, which they're not, but even if they were model citizens, this is an issue of reciprocity. So this is just crazy, Debbie, that we allow China to do these things in our country when we don't have reciprocal rights in their country.
Speaking of things they do in America, that China does in America, I've been wanting to ask you this for the longest time, and I keep forgetting. I keep reading about China purchasing farmland in Texas, and well, maybe all over America, but in Texas. And honestly, I mean, I'm sure you have a good answer. What would be the motive for China buying farmland in Texas?
Well, the one purchase that has attracted attention is in the southern part of the state, and it's not far from Laughlin Air Force Base. And many people are speculating that China wants to surveil the Air Force Base. I mean, the Chinese say they want to build a wind farm there, but, you know, that really is suspicious. And Debbie, this is not just Texas. There are reports recently that Chinese are coming over and buying portions of Oklahoma and Kansas and southern Missouri, I heard a couple days ago. And we don't know the reason for this. I think part of it is capital flight, that wealthy Chinese are becoming very concerned about what's happening in their country. And so they want to come over here and get their money out of China. But whatever it is, it's occurring very fast, and we need to get a handle on it. And we can do that because we have rules which require purchases by foreigners to go through the CFIUS review process. That's the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. It's an interagency task force run by the Treasury Department, and it can prevent foreign acquisitions of U.S. assets. So we need to start doing this until we can figure out what the devil is going on.
So these are, I'm so glad I asked that. So these are actually these purchases, so far as we know, of farmland in America. These are wealthier Chinese citizens, not the CCP or the government directly. Is that right?
We believe, or I believe that, yes, much of this, not all of it, but much of this is just wealthy Chinese. But some of this are Chinese companies, which, even though they're nominally private, still are required to further the goals of the Communist Party. There's Articles 7 and 14 of China's National Intelligence Law of 2017 that requires every Chinese entity, state, non-state, whatever, to commit acts of espionage if required. It also applies, by the way, to Chinese individuals, people who hold PRC nationality. So this means students on our campuses are under a legal compulsion to spy if demanded. So we have yet to figure out how to deal with this. And until we do, we need to cut links with China because we are just being overwhelmed by China. FBI, local law enforcement, federal government, state governments, we're just being overwhelmed at the moment.
That is truly shocking. One last thing, I could honestly, if you had 3 hours, I could take that long. But one last topic, if you have another minute here,
sure,
which has to do with there was a movement toward the end of the Trump administration to try to prevent Chinese companies being traded on American stock exchanges from if those companies in some way benefit the Chinese Communist Party. And so there was, and I'm not sure where it ended up at the end of the Trump administration, but I read things that sound like President Biden is saying he's fine with that, to have Chinese companies traded on American stock exchanges, even though those entities may end up supporting or helping the Chinese Communist Party. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, there are two issues here, and they're related. One is Chinese companies listed on U.S. exchanges not required to meet disclosure requirements that companies, American companies and others, are required to. The other issue is Americans investing into military-linked companies on the Chinese markets. President Trump, Executive Order 13959 of November 12, 2020, prevented Americans from investing in those military-linked companies. President Biden's Treasury Department on January 26 has deferred the application of a part of Executive Order 13959 until May 27th. And that allows Americans to invest in companies in China, including companies that have been sanctioned by the U.S., but companies that are, helping the Chinese military build up their weapons that are designed to kill Americans. So this is a hideous thing that the Biden administration did.
It most certainly is. Gordon Chang, you are a fount of knowledge. I am so grateful you happen to be available today. And really, as we start out on this apparently 4-year venture with a new president, President Biden, or soon to be probably President Harris, watching what's occurring with China, what it means for America's freedom is going to be one of the many issues we have to keep our eyes, we have to keep closely focused on. So thank you so very much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Me too. Okay, talk to you next time. Okay, folks, I got to tell you, I put the links up. The articles we were talking about are all listed on our website, americacanwetalk.org. On the homepage under shows, drop down list of links. I put a lot of articles up today. I urge you to read them because I think that it's great to hear an expert like Gordon Chang, and he is, it's amazing how he has all of the dates and the order numbers and just so many things he just knows personally and can just speak about them freely. But the information is really important for Americans to understand. This is not just a random intellectual discussion about a different foreign policy between the current administration in China and the past administration in China. This is about how much we concede or surrender to the Chinese. In fact, he mentioned the name again, that ancient philosophy now again embraced by Xi Jinping, that Qianxia idea, which is China is intended and meant by heaven to rule the world. This is how Xi Jinping talks about and believes in this. And many of the things his administration has been doing, the CCP has been doing, are part of that effort, that long-term effort, that long game that we don't always recognize in America. So very grateful Gordon Chang could join us.